For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey everyone, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Ryan McIntyre. He does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball, and we've got a great chat coming up with him because we have to discuss these guys are fishing for another year of eligibility, and some good, clean family fun right there. Additionally, we're going to be chatting with him about the fact that the West Virginia Mountaineers were able to pick up Trace in the Eagles staff, what all happened there with him committing to South Carolina, decommitting, and then deciding that he's going to go to West Virginia. We're seeing a lot of that. We're also going to be talking about just the importance of chemistry when it comes to this cycle as well. We're all focusing on these transfers, but want to give a little bit of focus and a little bit of love to these guys who are actually staying put. So we're going to be chatting about that with him and so much more in segment number 2. And then in the final segment, we're going to give you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. That is going to be probably 28 plus minutes because we had a lot of guys that decided where they are going to be going moving forward on Thursday. So we'll give you guys a recap of that. And if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And did not get in any Twitter/X questions today. And I always want to leave that segment number 1 to any questions that you guys do have. We've got a lot of offseason to go. We've got 5+ months, so please do fire those in. That said, how about if we do dive in and we do chat with our good friend, one of the best in the business, Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. And he is doing amazing work keeping track of what is very, very hard to keep track of in this day and age of college basketball with all these transfers, with all the hoopla. He and Kobe Dant over there at the College Experience are doing such great work. You're able to follow my Twitter/X at Moneyline_Mac, and Mac is spelled M-A-C. It is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Greg, I appreciate you having me. The portal window is finally closed.
Yep, but guys are still entering into the transfer portal. And what I found the last few days, and I'm sure that you picked up on this as well, there are guys with flat out no eligibility whatsoever that are entering in the transfer portal. What do we make out of these guys? Because I'm sure that a few of these guys are going to get offers, they're going to be committed, but we don't know if they're going to be out there on the court. We don't know if they're even going to get admitted to that school. It's causing for a big giant can of worms, and trying to be able to gauge these rosters has become more difficult than ever with all the things that are creeping up right now.
Yeah, basically it's college sports in 2025. You got guys entering the portal that got no eligibility. You got guys signing with other league members, rivalries. Crazy times, man. It's really hard to put your thumb on it just because it's kind of hard to explain if you're just tuning into the sport now and you're like, wait, this is what's going on? And it's like, yeah, this is where we're at with college athletics. But nothing really surprises me anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely wild when you see these guys signing in the transfer portal and then they uncommit, like we saw with Amar Uyugard. He left Fresno State after, I think it was like 10, 12 games, something like that, signs with Western Illinois for the upcoming season, and then he leaves Western Illinois before he plays a single game for them as well. I think that's a big giant ball of wax as well. These guys that they sign with programs and then they decommit before they're even able to get into that program, like even a guy like a Trace in Eaglestaff, for example, and how that went down.
And another thing, Greg, is a lot of these guys are trying to take money and then leave. We just saw it on the football front with Nico and that whole situation, that debacle. And then, I mean, Arkansas and others now are kind of pushing back. And I don't blame him. I mean, they got to protect the donors, the people that are ultimately paying these salaries for these players. You can't just take the money and then leave. I mean, any other place in America, you do that in the workplace, you're going to get sued or you're going to have to pay your buyout or there's a fee. So we do it with coaches. I don't know why this isn't in place already with the players.
And I'm not sure how you feel about this because I know that a lot of people think that, college sports needs to be sanctified and it needs to be all clean and everything like that. I feel like a lot of this would be avoidable if they just had something in writing. It doesn't even need to be like the most super formal contracts or something like that, but I don't think like almost any of this is in writing whatsoever, and that causes for things to be the wild west because with no paper trail of how anything comes about, it just leads to a he said she said sort of situation. And when you get into he said she said, we all know what happens. The NCAA, they lose in court.
And that's exactly what's happening. And like you said, Greg, we're lacking common sense here. If you sign something, you should have to abide by it. I mean, that's everywhere else in America where everybody goes for their job. But unfortunately, the NCAA just has no power in the courts. And as soon as anybody pushes back just a little bit, the NCAA folds like a lawn chair.
Yeah, I mean, man, the NCAA has become the Washington Generals in court cases over the last few seasons, to say the least. So that has been an interesting development as we do have Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, and he's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And one of the examples that I did mention was actually involving West Virginia. As for West Virginia, they are one of the beneficiaries of what we've seen in just terms of this hoopla madness that we're seeing in college basketball right now. They do pick up Trayson Eaglestaff, who was a really rock solid scorer over at North Dakota. Still remember that 40-plus point game they had against Alabama this past season, and now things are very much, in my opinion, fortified with regards to West Virginia because they've already got 7 guys that they've added in the portal, with 2 of the guys coming on over from North Texas and Jasper Floyd along with Brennan Laurenton. And I just look at this West Virginia team right now. I don't know if they're going to be like a top 5 team in the Big 12 in season number 1 or anything like that, but I do think that what Coach Hodge has been able to develop with West Virginia here thus far, with Eaglestaff coming on over, I'm liking what I'm seeing out of this program.
I'm with you, Greg, and I think we're looking at potentially that next tier, maybe that 6 to 9 range in the Big 12, that should be able to get to an NCAA tournament. They brought in guys that can score, the guys that can defend, guys that know Ross Hodge. And a lot of these guys are coming from winning programs like Jasper Floyd and Brennan Lauriant. They both come from North Texas. They know Ross Hodge. The big fella, Obiha, coming over from Wilmington. They were in the NCAA tournament. Honor Huff from Chattanooga. They won the NIT, won almost 30 games this year. Jackson Fields at Troy. They won the Sun Belt. And then Chance Moore at the Bonnies, I thought was a really nice piece. Bonnies always run a really good program. And then, of course, Eaglestaff is kind of the headliner because of his ability to score the ball. So a nice complement of pieces here for Ross Hodge in year number 1.
And when it comes to chemistry in general, I think that's interesting in this day and age because you're never going to have like 100% of your minutes coming back or anything like that. But how do you take a look at some of these teams, much like a West Virginia, where they have a new coach, but there are a few guys that are going to be coming over with that coach? You mentioned it with just Jasper Floyd along with Lorian. We'll see if anyone else comes on over from North Texas, whether that be an ancillary piece, what have you. But I do think that that's always something that is very important to be taking note of. And just because these guys weren't at West Virginia last season, having that familiarity with the coach, we saw that with someone like Vladislav Golden this past season over at Michigan. I think that that is absolutely massive.
And we saw it with Ben McCollum and Mr. Sturts, his point guard.
And now they're going to Iowa.
Exactly. So they're trying to run it back once again. Yeah, continuity is pivotal. When you have, especially at the point guard position, when the point guard and coach are a reflection of one another, I mean, you can't really put a value on that piece. So, yeah, I agree with you, Greg. I think a lot of these teams we're seeing be able to – continuity means more than ever in this day and age where it feels like 75% of your roster is new every year if you're on the generous side, I guess.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that it is so big to be taking a look at that. And I mean, obviously Ben McCollum and what he's going to be having over at Iowa, I would say that that's number 1 in terms of coaches. They're taking a new job and have a lot of guys coming on over with them because I think that there's at least 5 guys coming on over from Drake. So I think that that's number 1. But are there a few other coaches that you take a look at and you feel like they did a good job of retaining some of their own and they sort of did a nice job in terms of being a package deal in terms of a coach going to a new school, but also having a lot of other players from that previous stop following that coach as well?
You know, Greg, I was thinking about it. The year 2 coaches that really took nice steps in year number 1. And I'm looking at Mark Pope at Kentucky. I'm looking at Kevin Young at BYU. I'm looking at Dusty May at Michigan, John Calipari at Arkansas. I think that they were able to keep a lot of their guys and add to it. And Pat Kelsey at Louisville. And I think that they've added to the momentum that all 5 of those guys that I mentioned established in year number 1. So I think more so we're seeing more continuity. I think teams are valuing that more. The Houston and Purdue model, ironically, those are my top 1 and 2 in the country just because of returning production, returning guys and leadership that you can really trust. It is good to see some of these teams at the top with a lot of continuity. And I think come November, when we're trying to handicap these games early on, we'll lean heavily on those teams that we know what they look like because we've seen them play together before.
No question about it. As joining me on the show, we do have Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that it's going to be so interesting to do that because with regards to these teams that they have the chemistry, whether that be a coach taking a new job and having a lot of guys following him, or in the case of like Purdue, Houston, I know that those are two teams that we've laid out. We both like them because they actually have, here's a shocker, guys returning from the previous season because you just don't find that too much in this day and age of college basketball. But just how big is that? Because, I mean, I was mentioning it before. It feels like we might not even know what some of these rosters look like until September and October. And if we don't know what the rosters look like until September and October, how can we bank on the amount of practice time, the amount of chemistry that these guys are going to be able to get over the summer? So I think that even though it was a big deal in past years, I think that the chemistry actually gets even more amplified and it becomes even more important this offseason than it was before.
I know you can get rich quick, I guess, and flip your roster quick, but you look at it. I mean, Florida had a ton coming back from the previous year. Auburn had a ton coming back. And Houston had basically 9 out of their top 10 guys, 3 out of the 4, and then the outlier was Duke, who was able to bring in all those freshmen that were going to be lottery picks. So if you can't do the lottery pick, I would advise trying to get a lot of continuity coming back. You look at the year before, UConn was able to bring back a ton, and Purdue as well with Edey and that group. So in the end, I think continuity still does win in college basketball. It just is a lot of noise until we get there.
Yep, I do think that it's a lot of noise and it's a lot of hoopla in general, but I do think that just knowing what you're getting, which I know it sounds very simple, but in this day and age, you don't have a lot of that. I think that that is important. But how do you take a look at also some of these trustworthy coaches in this day and age of college basketball? Because there are some trustworthy coaches that are going to be flipping their rosters because I take a look at what St. John's has done in the transfer portal, being able to add in a guy like a Dylan Mitchell, being able to bring in a guy like Bryce Hopkins. I just go down the list of guys. They're going to be bringing in Osiah Sellers as well. I think that that's a team that I'm willing to bank on because even though they're going to have a lot of moving pieces from 8 seasons ago, they're not going to have a lot of chemistry returning. I just have a belief in Rick Pitino being able to get the job done and the way that he has stacked this roster for this upcoming season, being able to, shall we say, do a good job of being able to know where things went wrong with their three-point shooting last season, being able to address that makes me feel very bullish about the Red Storm.
I had them in my top 5, and they're going to be able to make a perimeter jump shot this year. That ultimately did them in at the end. Terrific year, get that program back on the national stage. And you know what's funny too, Greg? Well, I kind of was talking about this on the show. I mean, UConn didn't do that much in the portal, but I trust Dan Hurley. Bruce Pearl, they haven't done that much, but I trust him to be there. Nate Oates at Alabama. Otzelberger at Iowa State. Tom Izzo at Sparty. And even Dana Altman at Oregon or Todd Golden at Florida. Like, these are coaches, yeah, they haven't hit the big home runs in the portal, but I just know that they're going to be there. And I know they're going to be in the dance. They're going to win a game, maybe go to the Sweet 16. And if they get a really special group that can mesh together, then they could maybe go to a Final Four. But those are just teams that continuity, you just see it over and over again, that you know they're going to still find a way to at least go to the March Madness again.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do really like what they've been able to do, and certainly with the Big East in general, I think that's going to be interesting what we see out of that conference this season because it was a little bit of a down year for them this past year, but I'm in agreement with you that I think that they're going to be rock solid. And I know that we always talk about the bigger schools. We always talk about, oh, what are we going to be seeing out of like the Iowas, the Indianas of the world, obviously West Virginia, the Big 12 schools, but is there a mid-major or two that you take a look at this offseason and you feel like they've had a good offseason? I'll mention to you mine before I let you answer because I just take a look at what High Point did, and even though they lost their coach, the fact that they are dumping out as much NIL as they are, bringing in guys like Scotty Washington, bringing in some like a Rob Martin, Cameron Fletcher, I really look at them and I don't know where this money is coming from High Point, and I have no idea how they're able to do it all, but I'm really impressed with what they're building out there in the Big South.
They lost Alan Huss, promoted within. Private school down there in the state of North Carolina, and they definitely got some money. It's a tough question, Greg, just because at this point of the transfer portal, I think you see the high majors really rein in some of these big name recruits, and then we finally start getting the mid-major guys here over the next couple weeks. A team that I'm looking at, I like what San Diego State's been able to do. I think bringing back a lot of pieces that they had last year. I know it ended in an embarrassing way there in the playing game. But it was a rebuilding year. And I like some of the pieces that they were able to bring in, whether it was Sean Newman from Louisiana Tech, Jeremiah Odom from Charlotte, Latrell Davis from San Jose State. Different pieces here. And I think ultimately the San Diego State Aztecs team could be back in March once again under Brian Dutcher.
And they bring back Magoon Guath, the true 7-footer that say will pop it from three, and one of the best names out there in all of college basketball, if I do say so myself. And in this day and age of college basketball, just is there are certain styles that you find yourself gravitating towards a little bit more / less in terms of teams that you're willing to trust in the beginning part of the season? Because I always find myself not wanting to trust in a team like an Alabama that they just take a few too many threes, and a team like a San Diego State that you bring up who has a 7-footer in Magoon Guath, who is one of the better shot blockers in all of college basketball. That's a team that I'm going to find myself willing to buy into a little bit more towards the beginning part of the season when things are very much unknown and when you just don't have an idea of how these guys are going to be able to mesh in general.
Yeah, I think this goes back to our experience and continuity. I'm willing to trust those teams that have played together. Compared to Duke last year, I mean, they were a completely different team in November versus March.
And Cooper Flies don't grow on trees, kids.
Exactly. They lost to Kentucky the first week of the season, and then they lost to Kansas the next week. And by the end of the year, Duke was head and shoulders better than both of those teams. So I like the teams that have continuity, a lot coming back. Houston's and Purdue of the world. I know that's chalky, but how can you not trust them when you know 4 out of the 5 starters have already played together headed into the new year?
Absolutely. And there's one thing that I could certainly trust in. Great insight from you, Ryan. You do such a tremendous job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network and the college experience. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
I appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you guys can find us over at the college experience every single night, breaking down the portal, coaching carousel. I guess we're finally through the initial portal window. As long as nobody leaves, we should be done with that at least, and we can start forming some opinions on these teams. November will be here before we know it. And we do college football as well over there. And go check out the Ryan and Rush Show, West Virginia fans.
And Ryan, knowing the way that college basketball is going, we're probably going to get 5 more portal cycles. And we are going to have the NCAA get their reruns kicked in court about 17 different times. And we will have guys in the transfer portal in November because that's the way that's going right now. But you know what? We're here for it all. Ryan, he does such an amazing job being able to gauge this great sport that we all know and love of college basketball. And his insights always appreciated. Big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I recap the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Ryan McIntyre, who does such amazing work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights and did so once again today. So big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Relatively rock solid ad for Indiana late on Thursday. The fact that they are going to be bringing in Sam Alexis. He was a little bit limited in terms of back half of the season that he spent at Florida, but was part of the national title winners over there at Florida. And last we saw him for a fully healthy season, that was over at Chattanooga, a little bit of a lower level. He was averaging about 11 points, 9 boards, and 2 blocks per contest. This past year over at Florida, he was still a solid contributor, about 4.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. I think that he's going to be able to come in there, make a relatively solid impact for an Indiana team that, as we know, under the previous regime of Mr. Coach Woodson, they very much did value their big men. Under DeVries, there's going to be a little bit more balance, and there's not going to be 17 big men and absolutely no backcourt whatsoever. But that said, they did need a little bit more help with regards to things down low. I think that this is going to be a good way to be able to address that. I think that he's an upside guy that can make an impact both on offense and on defense. And Indiana really putting together a nice roster. They bring in Josiah Miles, a 6'6" combo player from North Florida. I think bringing in Connor Enright to help run the point is solid. Tucker DeVries obviously is coming with his father as well. Reed Bailey is is a guy that at 6'11" has good versatility as well. They didn't have necessarily that true big man. Being able to check that off the box, I think that is going to be able to help them out moving forward. So I do like to see that. You also did see late on Thursday as well, Tylan Riley. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Tulsa. He was averaging 7.5 points, right around about 2 assists per contest this past season while he was over at Cal Baptist. Wasn't necessarily the biggest impact guy in the world while he was over at Cal Baptist, but for Tulsa, I do feel like things are finally starting to go in the right direction for them. It's been a rough go of it since Eric Conkle took over, but you know what? They bring in Miles Barnstable, a nice double-figure score over at St. Thomas. Dorian Onchinewa, he was over at Georgia Tech. He's a 6'11" big man that's able to make an impact. Miles Rigsby, he was solid over at Troy. They've got a nice, well-rounded roster. I don't know necessarily how it's going to be coming together, but at the very least, the pieces are there for them to be a bit better than they have been in past years, and that's all you can ask, because for Tulsa, it's been an unmitigated disaster over them the last few seasons, so I do think that is going to be helping them out quite a bit. I think that this is going to be helpful as well. Dentrell Williams, he was last season over at Abilene Christian. He was able to give the team right around about 6 points, a little bit over a steal per contest, was a all-freshman player over there in the WAC. He's heading on over to Lindenwood. Now, we've noticed that with Lindenwood the last few seasons, they've had like one or two really good pieces, and then they have had absolutely nothing around them. So we will see if Lindenwood is able to build a little bit of depth this offseason, because they still have a lot of guys that they need to bring in. They still have a very incomplete roster, to say the least, but this is a good first step for them. They have Williams on the board. They really don't have a lot of other transfers out there, so I'm going to be trying to take notes, see if they're going to be bringing in anyone else, but that said, that is a good place to be able to start there. You've got Carmelo Pacheco. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Central Florida, and Central Florida was able to get a few nice ads. BJ Freeman is also going to be going on over with Pacheco as well. With Pacheco, he was shooting over at Mount St. Mary's in that neighborhood about 45% or so from three-point range. He was missing towards the back half of the season for the team's conference tournament due to injury, but this is a really good sharpshooter. He should be able to pair well with BJ Freeman, who, when he was over at UW Milwaukee 2 seasons ago, he was able to average 20 plus points per contest, and you're just not going to get that out of Pacheco. 9.5 points per game, so he's probably going to be a little bit more of a one-trick pony player for the Central Florida team. Freeman, he's able to be that do-it-all guy, even at Arizona State this last season. 2.5 assists, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. Like I said, over at UW Milwaukee, he was able to be that takeover scorer, being able to give the team 20 plus points per contest, but for Central Florida, I am really starting to like what this team is building up, as well as you've got just a lot of pieces in general that they're going to be able to mix and match with, albeit they lose pretty much their entire roster from a season ago. That's what happens in this day and age, but George Beal is also going to be added for this team. John Bull, 7'2", versatile big man, is coming in. Jeremy Fuana, who was over at Mississippi State, and also at Mississippi State, Riley Kugel, they're coming in. Themis Folks, who was ironically enough over at UW Milwaukee, and Jermichael Silva, who's over at UW Milwaukee, they're coming in. So there's a little bit of chemistry with regards to these transfers as well. That's something that you do want to be taking note of. When these teams are able to bring in these guys that did play with one another in the past, I think that that's a very good thing, and you've got that with Central Florida. You've got Josh Beadle, who was over at Boston College this last year. He was able to do a solid job, about 6 points, 2 assists per contest, spent the beginning part of his career over at Clemson. He has decided that he is going to be going to Coastal Carolina. For Coastal Carolina, it was a relatively rough season number one for them after they made a little bit of a coaching regime change, but I do think that things are starting to be on the up and up a little bit more for them. Coastal Carolina feels like they're really starting to utilize those NIL funds. They've got Rasheed Jones, who's going to be coming back. They bring in AJ Dantzler, who's a nice rock solid scorer over at Lemoyne, and a guy that's able to pop it from three-point range. So Coastal Carolina starting to be on the up and up a little bit there. And George Mason, we're going to talk with one of our good friends this weekend, Tristan Freeman of Boston Brackets. He's going to be noting about how the Atlantic 10 have been some of the biggest winners here in the offseason. They're bringing in Riley Allenpatch. He's a 6'11" big man that shot darn near 40% from three, 8 points, 3 rebounds, was a part of that Sam I Am for defense that was just able to swarm. And for George Mason, as we know, this has been one of the more slow and controlled teams in all of college basketball ever since Tony Skinn has taken over. Being able to have a guy that is able to crank it up a little bit more, I think is going to be a good thing. And this team has a lot down low now as well. Dola Adebayo, who was over at Mount St. Mary's this last season, he's coming in along Nick Ellingson, and then Jeremiah Hill, who was the top scorer over at Ball State. He enters into the fold. Jahari Long is going to be coming in. Masai Troutman, a nice go-to scorer who was over at Northeastern the last few seasons. This is a team that's really starting to check a lot of boxes, and I am loving what I'm seeing out there. So That was a very good pickup for them, and I do think that this is a pretty rock-solid pickup as well. Oje Gurrion, he was over at UT Martin this last season. He was able to average 12 points per contest, despite the fact that he played less than 20 minutes per game. He was shooting about 36-37% from three-point. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to LaSalle. This is a LaSalle team that they just need to turn over a new leaf in general after Fran Dunphy. I mean, he is a legend of the game, but he wasn't able to elevate that program, and this is going to be a very much a new-look team. They bring in Jerome Brewer Jr., who was over at McNeese. Gurrion is going to be a nice little go-to scorer. Truth Harris, who was a main guard over at Radford this past season, he's coming into the fold. Jaden Marshall, who was able to do some nice things over at Niagara. Justin Archer, who is rock solid down low over at Radford and Georgia State. These are all guys that are going to be coming in. A little bit of familiarity between these transfers as well. LaSalle, they're taking a few swings on some of these upside guys like a Rob Dockery, who comes on over from Texas A&M. They've got some proven guys as well. I really like this mix, so that was a really good pickup for them. So we'll see how things are able to continue to materialize for them moving forward, and things are materializing very well for Calais. How about Chris Bell, who was over at Syracuse this last season, 9.5 points per contest. He, over his last 2 seasons over at Syracuse, shot darn near 40% from three. Really, the apex was when he shot 42% from three-point range 2 seasons ago. He's decided that he's going to be heading out over to Cal. Now, Cal, I think, is a program that is going to be able to get back online. For Cal, they did a really nice job a few off seasons ago with regards to going out there, getting the hire that they did, and Mark Madsen, he just has had limited resources to work through, and Cal going from the Pac-12 to the ACC, that was obviously a little bit of a culture shock for them as well, but being able to pick up a guy like a Bell, I think that he's going to be able to fit this offense very well. They're going to need him to play a little bit of defense, but you've had a few guys that have some flash in there that have come over, like you're going to be bringing in John Camden, who was a top scorer over at Delaware, Justin Pippen, who was a part of Michigan this past season, then a little bit of an upside guy, Milos Elich, who was over at Loyola Maryland. They've got a nice blend coming in. Day-Day Ames, I felt like deserved more minutes over at Virginia. I like the way that Cal is really putting together this roster, and I do think that Mr. Madsen going to be able to get things online sooner rather than later, and this is very much a step in the right direction, and I do think that this is a step in the right direction as well, as you've got Tyrone Marshall deciding that he is going to be going to George Washington, and George Washington is doing a great job in the transfer portal. Really, the Atlantic 10 in general has been able to impress me, as George Washington, we did see them about 24 to 48 hours ago decide to add Boo Boo Benjamin, who was a sharpshooter and the top scorer over at Tarleton State this last season. It looks like they're going to be getting in Gina Amaruja and Alontre Dinkins as well from within the northeast part of the country. Now you got a guy like a Tyrone Marshall, who's 6'7", not a guy that's like going to light you up from three-point range and have all sorts of versatility, but he's able to be a guy that's able to go in multiple positions, a little bit over a steal, 6.5 boards, 10.5 points per game. Really like what he's able to bring to the table, and I do think that he's going to play very well off of Boo Boo Benjamin, and I do think that the wide variety of defenses that George Washington is going to be able to play, that's going to be big for them. You got Jake Heidbreder deciding that he's going to be heading back to the Mountain West. He began his career over at Air Force, where he was averaging 15 points per contest a few seasons ago. And remember, he was about a 40% three-point shooter out there for Clemson this last year. 4 points per game was a relatively nice off-the-bench sort of score, but didn't necessarily have that big of a role. He has decided that he's going to go to Fresno State, and for Fresno State after the season that they had, any W that they could get is good, because they're dealing with the whole gambling scandal, and they had to let go like half of the team towards the back half of the season. For Fresno State, they have not been able to add much in the transfer portal. As a matter of fact, I believe that Heidbreder is the only guy on their ledger right now, so we'll see how things are able to, shall we say, go forward for Fresno State. But Heidbreder, he should be able to see plenty of minutes, and he should be able to go into a little bit over takeover mode, as you also had Conrad Martinez, he was over at Arizona this last season, just wasn't able to get out there on the floor. Gentleman from Spain, he's heading on over to High Point, and High Point just keeps adding guys. Like, I think that High Point has utilized every single roster spot that they've got already, but, I mean, it's a really nice blend. Now you've got a guy from the high major level, a little bit of an international man of mystery they're going to take a little bit of shot on. You've got Chase Johnson coming back after he was a sharpshooter over at High Point. Cameron Fletcher, when he's fully healthy, coming in from Xavier, he's able to make an impact. Scotty Washington is coming over from CSUN. I like the fact that you were able to bring in Rob Martin from Southeast Missouri State. Owen Aquino, he's able to give you some versatility as well. Like, it feels like they're Noah's Ark with two of everything. Now, the two of everything is not necessarily amazing, but they've got two of everything. So, very interesting to take a look at that, to say the least. And I do think that things are very much on the up and up for them, and things are also on the up and up for St. Joe's, as they're going to be bringing in Jaden Glover, a guy that just wasn't able to see a lot of minutes when he was over at St. John's and with St. John's. With all the additions that they made, here in the offseason. There was just going to be really no chance for him whatsoever to be able to get out there on the floor. With St. Joe's, they do lose a lot of the backcourt like Xavier Brown and company, so there was an opening there. And for Glover, this is a guy that if you looked at him in high school, he's able to pop it from three. 247 Sports rated him as a top 100 recruit, guy that is 6'4". For St. Joe's last year, the three-point shooting was a little bit hit or miss. I think that he's going to be able to elevate that a little bit, so I do like this ad for them. And then with Florida, I feel like this is going to be a little bit more of a depth ad than anything else, but A.J. Brown is going to be coming on over from Ohio, and we've seen Ohio transfers go into the SEC and have themselves some success. I'm looking at you, Mr. Marks here, so I mean, that's big. You've got a guy in Brown who was able to give the team 13 points per contest, shot just below 40% from three-point range. Again, with Florida, I don't think they're going to be utilizing him as a scorer, but I mean, we've seen them bring in mid-major guys like Walter Clayton if they stick in the system for multiple years. I think that Brown has a chance to be able to do so. They are very able to be formidable, and I do think that if there is a buy-in there, that's going to prove to be very, very good for this program. You've got Bryce Baker, who was over at Winthrop this last season, 7 points, 3 boards per contest, shot north of 38% from three-point. He's going to be going to Charleston, just a really good ad in general for Charleston. They love these guys. They're able to pop it from three-point range, these high-octane guys, and Winthrop was one of the more up-tempo teams in all of college basketball. For Charleston, they've done a nice job, in my opinion, of just being able to mix and match in the transfer portal. Kobe Duggan, that top scorer over at Campbell, is coming over. Jalen Counter was over at Middle Tennessee. He was a double-figure scorer for them. Connor Hickman, he's able to run the point. He was amazing over at Bradley 2 seasons ago. Was stuck a little bit on the bench over at Cincinnati. This is a Charleston team that also brings in Christian Reeves, who is able to give you some size from Clemson. I really like the way that they're just dotting the I's, crossing the T's. They've got a bit of everything right now with this roster, so absolutely love that. And I love this for Texas as well. As we know, Texas, they're probably going to be playing a high-octane style as they bring in a guy that is very used to playing up-tempo in Sean Miller, and they're bringing in Simeon Wilcher. Just could never really find his footing in terms of three-point shooting over at St. John's, but he was able to do a nice job giving the team a steal, 8 points per contest. Him in this system, I think, is going to be very good for Texas, and with Texas, they've done a really good job of just being able to build out this roster in general. You've got a guy that knows what that he's doing in terms of just being able to run good, clean offense. As for this Texas team, they bring in a few Xavier transfers. Lucina Traore, who was a double-double machine over at Long Beach State a few seasons ago. They bring in Cameron Heidi, who is over at Purdue. He's a guy that's able to be a good knockdown shooter. You've got Mateus Volkatis, who's a true 7-footer from Florida Atlantic as well. So they're really doing a nice job filling out this roster. They're going to have a few returning pieces from the season ago. You have to think that with Sean Miller coming in, you're not going to have a ton of those pieces. But that said, I do think that this has been a good portal cycle for them, and I do like what they're able to bring to the table there. This is going to be a little bit more of an upside add, as you've got Zion Harmon, who has decided that he is going to be returning back to Bethune-Cookman. And for Bethune-Cookman, I think that this has been an amazing offseason for them, because you're getting Zion Harmon back, who he just wasn't able to find his footing over at Seton Hall. They just did not give him any minutes whatsoever. 2 seasons ago when he was over at Bethune-Cookman, 14.5 points, 4 assists, 1.7 steals per contest. Bethune-Cookman 2 seasons ago was a top 10 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They get him back, and then if you recall, 2 seasons ago, another guy that had bolted via the transfer portal was able to do a good job of being able to pair with him, as you had Jacoby Heedy give you 15 points, 4.5 boards per contest. These two guys are reuniting. You never see this with a school like Bethune-Cookman. They lose 2 of their top 3 scorers from 2 seasons ago, and now they're coming back. You've already got that familiarity with the program because they still have Reggie Theus as their coach. You're looking at a Bethune-Cookman team that might be able to do some damage out there in the SWAC, so I very much like that. Malcolm Thomas, he was a Villanova guy that was a top 150 recruit, according to 247 Sports, really couldn't get out there on the floor. He's going to be heading on over to Dayton, and I do think that Dayton is going to be a very fascinating team to watch moving forward, because I do think that they've got quite a bit of upside, and they've got some NIL to be able to burn as well. This is a guy that I'm a little bit unfamiliar with his game from everything I've seen. He's got some good versatility, and we saw Dayton really strike out in the transfer portal last season. They added a lot of flash, but not necessarily a lot of substance with bringing in the guys like Pasha Alexander, Zed Key, what have you. I feel like they're doing it right this offseason. Then Antoine Burnett, I think that he's getting it right. He was over at Grambling this last season. He was one of their main scorers, 10 points, 5.5 boards, was able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range at 6'5". He's decided that he's going to be going to Missouri State. For Quanzo Martin, last season over at Missouri State, it was a lot of close but no cigar. The team was much more competitive than the record looked. They just lost a lot of close games. They were in a part of just some harebrained games in general, and this is really the first ad by the transfer portal. Missouri State, they did a bad job in the portal last offseason, so they're going to need to jump on it. They're going to need to add some more guys, but that's a step in the right direction. I do think that that's a guy that is going to be able to come in, give you a little bit of something there. And then you've got Cody Head, who 2 seasons ago, he was over at Lipscomb, where he was averaging about 8 points per contest. Last year over at Arkansas State, didn't see a lot of minutes. He's going to be heading on over to Akron, and I do like this ad for the Zips of Akron because this is a unit that is able to do a nice job of utilizing their depth. This past season, they were a rock-solid team both on offense and on defense, and for Akron, they haven't made a bunch of moves here in the transfer portal quite yet, but they are going to be bringing back a little bit of that backcourt from a season ago. It remains to be seen what exactly they're going to be getting, because I know that the transfer portal cutoff date is, I believe, already coming past as I'm recording this podcast. If not, it's going to be coming within the next few hours, but I'm sure that there's still going to be guys looking to abandon ship if at all possible, but for Akron, I do think that they're going to once again be able to have some great depth, and John Gross we trust on this podcast, and for Akron, I do think that this is going to be solid for them moving forward, and I also think that this one is pretty solid. Marcus Banks, who last season he was over at UMBC, 16.5 points, a little bit over CO per contest, shot 42% from 3. He's heading on over to UMass, and the reason why that's big for UMass, they were absolutely awful from 3-point range this last season. They needed any sort of 3-point shooting whatsoever that they could get. Being able to add a guy like this, I think it's going to be able to bring some balance to a UMass Minutemen team that, quite frankly, they just really, really needed it. So I do like to see them trying to be able to address some of their issues, and UNLV, they're looking to be able to address some of their issues as well. I love this at Kamani Hamilton, who began his career over at Mississippi State, went on over to High Point, and he became a nice scorer for them. 13 points, 4.5 boards, a little bit over 2 assists, a steal at 6'7". Not necessarily an amazing 3-point shooter, but a guy that's able to pop it a little bit from 3-point range. Josh Passer, I think, has really done a good job of being able to build a nice roster, and I felt like he deserved better over at Memphis. Like, I know that everyone wanted Penny Hardaway and what have you, but he had a better record than Penny Hardaway has had thus far. He's had more NCAA tournament success, and for UNLV, bringing in Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, who he comes on over from Illinois to be able to run the point. Al Green is a nice sharpshooter. Now you bring in this gentleman in Kamani Hamilton. You have Laji Dembali, hopefully I said that correct, from Iowa, who's able to give you a bit of something at about 6'9". Emmanuel Stephen is a 7-footer from Arizona. Could use probably a little bit more 3-point shooting, as Howie Fleming I don't think is necessarily the answer there, but oh no, for UNLV, they're going to be able to play some tough, tenacious defense, and I like the direction that they're heading in. You've got Artarian Page. He was over at Cincinnati this last season, just was unable to get out there on the floor too much. At 6'11", he was lost in the sauce with so many guys like Aziz Bendango and company being able to do a rock-solid job down low, but he has decided that he is going to be bolting Cincinnati, and he is instead going to be heading on over to Northwestern, and Northwestern has needed a little bit more size down low, and I think that this is going to be a good ad for really both of these teams, as Northwestern's being kryptonite has been being able to hit the glass. This is a guy in Page who was a former top 75 recruit, a guy that was out of the state of Georgia, so not necessarily back to his roots or anything like that, but being able to get someone like this to be able to help out down low for Northwestern, a Northwestern team that hasn't brought in a ton of splashy guys via the transfer portal. I think that this is a nice shrewd move by them, and I do think that this is a nice move as well, as you do have yourself a guy in Lewis Walker who's going to be adding on over to North Carolina A&T, 6'6" combo player that redshirted this past season, but someone that I think is going to be able to come in, be able to give you some relatively good production. If I'm not mistaken, he was over at Winston-Salem for a little bit of time as well, so I do think that Walker, as a 6'6" combo player over at North Carolina A&T, he's going to be able to do a solid job there. And then you saw Shadron Sharp, who was over at Southern Illinois this last season. He's going to another Southern school. He's heading on over to Southern Indiana. Was solid in terms of his facilitation, with about 2.5 assists per game. Not a guy that's really going to knock it down from 3-point range, but for Southern Indiana, sometimes they got a little bit out of sorts in terms of their offense. They had good shooters, but they didn't really have the best way of being able to bring all that shooting together. Being able to bring in a guy like a Sharp, who is going to be very sharp at being able to get guys the ball, I do think that that's solid. And for Southern Indiana, they still have a little bit of work to be done in the transfer portal. They're just getting started here, but I do think that that's a good place to start. And they also have Stephen Clay from Morehead State. He's going to be entering into the program as well, so that's a pair of relatively nice moves. Now, I don't know what this guy is going to be able to give you, but Luke Bang Boy, who was over at VCU this last season, he was a starter for them. He was relatively solid. Down low, 2 blocks per contest, 4 points per game. He's decided that he's going to be heading to Texas Tech. I think that this is a move that you're looking at 2-3 years down the road if he stays with the program that is going to be rock solid. I don't think that's necessarily going to be paying a whole heck of a lot of dividends this season, but Grant McCasland loves his defense. We saw that when he was over at North Texas, and that's been the one real knock that I've had on him on Texas Tech, because Texas Tech has been amazing ever since he took it over. But that said, this is a gentleman that he has had a little bit of a departure from that slow, controlled style that he had over at North Texas. It looks like he's starting to beef up a little bit more on defense, and it looks like he's going to be playing more of that Frederico role, and if that's their intentions, I do think that this is going to be a solid ad for them. Again, not a guy that I think is going to be coming in there lighting the world on fire or anything like that, but I do think that this is a nice, solid pickup for them, and I do think that this is a solid pickup for Memphis, as Memphis, they are going to be looking for the flash here. Doug McDaniel, who was over at Kansas State this last season, he had 5 assists, 11.5 points per contest while he was over at Michigan. He was a go-to scorer for them. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Memphis, and with this Memphis team, I don't necessarily know how all the pieces are going to be working out. Again, they're going to have a lot of great talent on this team. As for Memphis, you had him, you have Sincere Parker in that backcourt. Aaron Bradshaw is a former top 15 recruit. He comes in as well. Can they tap into, shall we say, untapped potential? That is a question for Memphis. And Penny Hardaway, he's been a great recruiter, not such a great coach. We will see what sort of a coaching job he's able to do this season, because if he turns the corner as a coach, he's got all the talent in the world for this bunch being relatively rock solid. If he can't turn that corner, it might be a little bit rough. And I do have to report this as well, because we've got a guy that's actually returning to where he came. Jalen Spear, who 2 seasons ago was a nice go-to scorer over at Florida A&M. He really took over the game when he was over at Marshall this past season. Had a rough go of it in non-conference play. In conference play, he was shooting north of 40% from three-point range. Overall for the season, 11 points per contest, 13 plus points per contest in Sunbelt play. He's actually going back to Marshall, and I mean, once again, very much a rarity. A guy actually deciding, I am not going to be transferring, and that becomes news in this day and age, but I think that's big for Marshall. You now have a guy with a little bit of familiarity. They haven't done a lot in the transfer portal. Wilson Dubinsky, who is a rock solid guard for South Carolina State, really their lone ad thus far in the transfer portal, but being able to bring back a guy like that, that's something that you'll take every day of the week. And then Jemai Felt, he has decided that he's going to be feeling himself over at Temple. Go Owls. He last season over at Bowling Green was the team's top rebounder with about 6 boards, 5.5 points per game for Temple. This team was very hit or miss on the glass this past season. They had Steve Settle and really not a whole lot else, so they were very much settling for getting absolutely pounded on the glass. I think that this is a good ad for them, because I do think that this is a system in general that is going to be able to produce some good, solid offense. We even saw them without Jamal Mashburn Jr. be able to have good guard play, so I think that that's going to be able to help them out, and we're going to need to see what else Temple does in the transfer portal. They've been very silent to this point, but I do think that that is going to be able to help them out a little bit more moving forward. I think that this is helpful as well. CSUN, Cal State Northridge are going to be adding Larry Hughes Jr. just with with injuries this last season, was only able to get out there for 7 games for St. Louis. You look at what he was able to do 2 seasons ago. Very versatile, well-rounded player, 7.5 points, a little bit over a steal per game. As we know, he's got good bloodlines, with it being Larry Hughes, who is indeed his father. But for CSUN, I do think that this team just always does one of the better jobs of any other in college basketball, being able to find these guys that are just really good fits in general. And we saw them bring in Andy Newman as their coach 2 seasons ago from the Division II level. He knows what he's looking for in this system, a guy that is very versatile with a little bit of size like this. He doesn't necessarily have supreme size, but you know what? He's able to give you a little bit of this and that. Him being able to team up with a Josh O'Gara, who comes on over from Texas State, a guy that began his career out there in the Big 12. I really am excited to see what CSUN is able to do, and I think that they're going to be able to continue that success moving forward. You did see this man in Dominique Ford, aka Dom Ford. He's decided that he's going to San Diego. San Diego, thank goodness gracious, they're finally hitting the transfer portal, and they might be able to give you a little bit of something, as Ford last year, 14.5 points, steal per contest, low 33-point shooter, missed a little bit of time due to injury, was limited to 25 games, but for San Diego, it's been just a wild ride for them ever since they added Steve Lavin as their coach. As season number 1 under Steve Lavin, they were really going after those big-time names and those power conference guys, and then after that didn't pan out, they really didn't hit the transfer portal whatsoever for any sort of D1 guys. This year, it feels like they're starting to get somewhere between A and B, which is where they should be. They've also got Tunari Lane that's coming in from Georgia State. They're going to need to add something down low, but I mean, those are a pair of guys that are very good starting points for this team, and I think that this is a nice starting point for Northern Iowa. Ismail Duaf, he was over at NC State this last season, was a little bit limited in the way that he was able to get out there on the floor, only about 2.5 points per contest, but for Northern Iowa, they've always needed a little bit more down low. Having a guy like a Duaf coming into the fold, I think that that is going to be solid for them. I think that this is solid for Hofstra. AJ Willis, a proven shooter. He shot 43% from 3 this last year over at Wyoming, only was able to see about 5 points per contest. He was in the shadows a little bit of some of the more, shall we say, rambunctious guards. He's going to be coming on over to Hofstra. He's used to playing in a very slow and controlled style. Wyoming was a team that was relatively solid on the glass as well. So I think that this is a really good fit. I do think that they've done a nice job of being able to just get guys that are going to be able to come in right away and make good contributions. And I think that this guy is going to be able to make some sort of contribution for Indiana, as Indiana has a lot of guys coming in via the transfer portal. I mentioned the fact that they're getting Sam Alexis, but they're also getting Nick Dorn, a 6'7" combo player, already on this last season. 15 points per game, shot 36% from three-point range. I do think that he's going to be able to fit the DeVries style, and for Indiana, it's a case where the rich get richer. Now, I think that Dorn is going to be a little bit more of an ancillary piece for the team, but even just being able to have that depth in general, I think that that's going to be able to help them out. And then Demarion Watson, he was over at Iowa State this past season, a 6'7" combo player that he just got passed up in terms of rotation, and rightfully so, because with this Iowa State team, you need to really be tremendous offensively to be able to crack that lineup, but additionally, you needed a little bit more, shall we say, offense as well. And Watson, he was able to provide the defense, didn't have as much on the offensive side of things. Now he's decided that he is going to be heading on over to North Texas. When he was coming out of high school, Watson was a top 175 recruit, according to 247 Sports. I think that he's going to be able to go over to North Texas. Again, not going to be that offensive dynamo or anything like that, but a 6'7" combo player that's going to be able to guard multiple positions. North Texas, even though they do lose their coach in the offseason and Mr. Russ Hodge, I still think that they're going to be very much a defense-oriented team. I do think that this is a really good ad for them. I do like this ad as well. Braden Carrington, he began his career over at Minnesota this last season. He was over at Tulsa. He was able to average 7.5 points, 5 rebounds per game. He's going to be heading on over to Wisconsin. Now, if you're Wisconsin, you probably don't want Carrington to have to try to carry the team or anything like that, but they were able to spot a diamond in the rough last offseason in John Tonje. I still have some question marks with this Wisconsin team with all that they have lost, but they're bringing in Nick Boyd from San Diego State. They're bringing in Andrew Rohde, who he began his career out there in the state of Minnesota, and they're bringing in a lot of guys in general that they've got some familiarity with the Midwest, and I do think that that's big for Greg Gard. The system has very much changed a little bit over at UW Green Bay with what we saw this last season, so love to see that. And then another former Tulsa player, Jared Garcia, he this last season was able to average 9.5 points per contest, only got out there for 17 games. He missed the first half of the season. He's transferring to the Midwest as well. He's going to be heading on over to Nebraska. I think that this is a nice ad for them. He's got a little bit of versatility to his game. He's going to be able to help out a Nebraska team that was a little bit soft down low. Other than Berkey Butiso, they didn't have a single guy that gave you north of 5 rebounds per game. Garcia is able to guard multiple positions. I think that he's going to do well in that sort of environment. And then you've got Sheldon Williams-Dryden. He was over at West Georgia this last season. Nice rock solid do-it-all player. A guy from the state of Wisconsin that averaged 17.5 points, 7.5 rebounds per game. He's heading on over to UW Green Bay. Now, for UW Green Bay, what you're going to be able to get in terms of the coaching in season number 2, and nobody knows because, man, that was not good to say the least. But with that said, at the very least for UW Green Bay, they're bringing in someone via the transfer portal, and you'd think that having a coach like Doug Gottlieb would be able to help you get a few more resources. I'm not saying that they're going to have like $100 billion to spend or anything like that, but you have to expect that you have some resources if you're UW Green Bay, and well, they have not really added too much in the transfer portals. I believe that this is the first real big ad that they've had. Maybe I'm mistaken here, but they've lost a lot of guys in the transfer portal, so they finally do get a W, and hopefully this podcast is a W for you as we're tracking everything that's happening in college basketball, and it's been a wild and crazy ride. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Go Seeps, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter / X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Ryan McIntyre, the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, for joining me in the last segment. And I'll be coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off-season. So I'm back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.